guys, welcome back. I'm super excited for today. I'm going to share my spring TBR with you. The likelihood that I stick to this is not that high because I'm a big mood reader and the books that I want to read in the moment tend to change a lot, but when I'm really lost, I like to refer back to my TBR. That being said, I also really love making TBR lists. I think they're really fun. It's probably because I get really excited about reading new books, and so choosing them for a season is something that I really enjoy doing, hence why I make a lot of TBRs. I wrote it down in my journal, but looking at this, a lot of them I've talked about before. A lot of them are actually from my yearly TBR, so they might sound familiar, but hopefully I'll get to these books. Okay, let's just start off with my physical TBR, which is right here. First is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is her most popular story for sure, and I haven't gotten to it yet. I've only read A Room of One's Own by her, but I do really like the way that she writes. I do believe that she is known for her stream of consciousness, and I have several books by her. This one is one of my favorite covers. I just think it's so beautiful. I love the Penguin Modern Classics. Something about a painting on a cover just really does it for me. This is actually a painting by Edward Wolfe, which is called Portrait of Madge Garland. I do believe that it's about a woman in high society who is preparing for a party, and then we kind of get lost in her thoughts as she remembers people she loved. It just seems like a very good spring book, and I really want to get to it. The next one I've talked about in one of my last vlogs. It's Permafrost by Eva Baltazar, translated by Julia Sanchez. On the back it says that it talks about women's freedom to embrace both pleasure and solitude, and speaks boldly of the body, of sex, and of the self. And it follows a protagonist who I think gets sick of her life in Barcelona and decides to go to Brussels. This is a very short book, just like Mrs. Dalloway, and I think when the weather is nicer, I tend to want to get into short books more than really long books, because there's something about nice weather that is fleeting to me, and I'm in the mood for shorter books. It sounds right up my alley as well, and I'm sure I'm going to love it because Eva Baltazar has been praised for her writing. You've heard me talk about this one as well. It's Broods by Dis Tate. This follows two sisters who I believe get obsessed with one of their neighbors, and I've heard that it's a little gross, but in the type of way that's enjoyable to read. Like, the obsession gets really intense, and that's something that I find really funny in books. I'm currently actually reading Big Swiss, but there's something about deep obsession that I find really fun to read, so I'm hoping that I will like this one. I also really like the cover. It says that she captures the violence, horrors, and manic joys of girlhood. Sounds really good. This is a very well-known classic, and unlike most of the books I wanted to talk about, it's huge. It's Emma by Jane Austen, and I said I wanted to read it this year, and in my yearly TBR video, people said that they really love Emma, and I think it's the Jane Austen that interests me most. I've never been drawn to Pride and Prejudice, haven't even watched the movie, but this one I think it's going to be so fun because it's about Emma who likes to matchmake her friends, and it just sounds like really gossipy but fun. And I also really like these vintage classic editions because the text is written in a normal size and not criminally small, so it seems less intimidating to read. That being said, it is over 500 pages, so it's definitely going to take a bit to read, especially because I'm guessing the language is going to be harder to get through, but I've heard great things, and I've been waiting for spring to finally pick it up. I don't think I've ever talked about this one, but this is On Beauty by Zadie Smith. I bought it over the summer in France. I really wanted to buy a Zadie Smith book, and I was perusing the back, and this one sounded insanely good. It says, "Why do we fall in love with the people we do? Why do we visit our mistakes and our children? And what makes life truly beautiful?" It says that it's set between London and New England, and it follows a pair of feuding families and an entanglement of doomed affairs. For these two clans, the personal and political confusions of our uncertain age are about to be brought close to home. Pitting low morals against high ideals, Zadie Smith crafts a note-perfect modern comedy of manners which asks us what life truly does to love. I'm especially excited to get a taste for her writing because she is an author that inspires authors I really like, and it says that she won the Women's Prize for Fiction, so I'm sure that it's going to be a book that I'm going to love because because it sounds like a book with all the themes that I enjoy reading about. Next is The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante. This is book 2 in the Neapolitan Quartet, and we follow Lila and Lenu in their 20s. I've heard this one is a lot of people's favorite. I think it's going to be my favorite as well because I'm in my 20s right now. I actually reread My Brilliant Friend this month. I'm going to talk about it more in my wrap up, but I'm so moved by this story and I'm so attached to the way that she wrote the story and the story itself as well. It's very dear to my heart. This is definitely one I'm going to be getting to because I want to finish the quartet this year anyway, and I can't wait to get to this. The last 2 books on my physical TBR are French. First is Les Années by Annie Ernaux. I've talked about this book, I feel like so many times. It's The Years. I'm pretty sure it's either a memoir or an autofiction. She is probably the most well-known French author, I want to say, at least of our times. I discovered a love for memoirs, autofiction last year. It's one of my favorite things to read now. I think they get charged with sentiment in a way that fiction books don't always do. There's something about reminiscing about your own life makes it really emotional for me to read, and that's why I love them. I'm sure I'm going to love this one. And then the final book on my physical TBR is also French. It's Ce que le jour doit à la nuit by Yasmina Khadra. I've heard brilliant things about this book. It's a book that my grandmother loves, and my grandmother also loves Ferrante actually. We've had like conversations about this, so I feel like I'm going to love it as well because we have similar tastes in general fiction. This takes place in Algeria in 1930, and I'm actually not exactly sure what it's fully about, and I don't really want to read the back because I want to go into this more blind than not. But from what my grandmother has told me, his writing is extremely lyrical and poetic, and I'm really excited to get to this. Moving on to my Kindle reads, unless I buy them. There is one that I am 99% sure I want to buy. The one I do think that I will want to buy is Martyr by Kaveh Abkar. This is one of those books where I haven't seen a single negative review. I've only heard people wholly enamored with it. In fact, I think all the people that I follow on Goodreads who have read this have given it 5 stars or just say that it's one of their favorite books. And we follow a protagonist who is dealing with addiction. He is a poet and he is also dealing with grief. Kaveh Abkar himself, I believe, is a Iranian-American poet, so I feel like it's going to be very lyrical as well. And honestly, I don't want to know more than that because it sounds like a book that is very moving, and so definitely want to read that. Next is Vivienne by Emalea Rousseau. I've talked about this recently, but I think it was in a French vlog. This talks about art. It asks the question, what is the cost of vision? What is the price of art? And I've heard that it's a slightly disturbing read, so I think I'm going to like it. It sounds like it's also a little obsessive, and like I said, I really enjoy those kinds of books. Sometimes I love to read a lovable main character, but I also really like to read morally gray characters because I think following their psyche is really interesting, so I hope that I will like that one. Okay, second to last is L'Amant by Marguerite Duras. I've talked about this before. It takes place in Vietnam, and I've heard pretty good things. It's interesting because I have heard about this book not from French people, but actually from the English book community, but people really like it. So yeah, I'm really excited to get to that at some point. Hopefully it will be in the months of spring. And then finally is a book I've never talked about. It's called Adelaide by Genevieve Wheeler, and it follows a woman who moves to London, I believe, and she doesn't feel like herself anymore. It sounds like she's going through a life crisis in her mid-20s, and I have one friend on Goodreads who rated it 5 stars recently, and the cover was really appealing to me, and it sounds like she is head over heels in love with this man who does not like her back, or at least does not treat her as she should be treated. I find Unrequited Love a really interesting subject to read about. And I think it's because of the juxtaposition between the intensity of the feeling you have for the person and also the idea that you don't actually love them, but a version that you invented of them. So I'm really curious to read that one. But yes, that's my very long spring TBR. I hopefully will get to a lot of these books in the next 3 or so months. Spring and summer are my favorite time to read. Summer being my favorite, I get even more excited with reading than in the winter. So I'm really excited to get to these books. Let me know what's on your spring TBR if you have one. If you don't, I hope that maybe one of these books also interests you. I'll see you soon.